Hello, my name is Kendall Henry,
I'm Joe Taylor.
I'm Erickson Goff.
I'm Fendi.
and we are students at the University of San Diego. And for our Exploring Religious Meaning class, we wanted to see how the change-making program on campus could be viewed as a sacred narrative.
So in 2008, Ashoka University began an international campaign to create Changemaker campuses. They define a Changemaker campus as a community of leaders and institutions who work collectively to make social innovation and change-making the new norm in higher education and beyond. And we wanted to see how the narrative of change-making played out on our campus.
In order to do that, we interviewed specific groups of people on campus to see how the change-making narrative affected them. First off, I interviewed involved students. So I interviewed students involved in USD's Changemaker Hub, and I came to a couple of interesting conclusions. All of the students I talked to were drawn into the program because of the welcoming environment that the Changemaker Hub provided. They identified a desire to change the community, but not necessarily through large acts, but through small acts of kindness and inclusion. That was the strongest emphasis I found with my interviewees: inclusion. The Changemaker narrative at USD was sacred to people involved because it promoted an environment different from the general USD environment. It was a demarcated space where students are welcomed. Their sacred space was one where everyone was encouraged to be themselves, and there was a heavy emphasis on language and how they utilized their words to empower others. From the students I talked to, it was clear that they wanted to cultivate an environment where kindness and inclusion could thrive and social change could take hold. The Changemaker narrative also has an emphasis on changing the individual rather than the masses all at once. Lastly, while involved students saw themselves change as a result of partaking in the sacred narrative of change-making, the key motivation for their joining of the program was to help other people. Next off, we had a couple members of our group interview staff members.
So for my part, I interviewed some faculty that in the Changemaker Hub. So all of them have the aim, the Changemaker Hub is a organization encourage students to think about themselves and others, and they encourage students be with them, and first you need to be comfortable with yourself and who you are, and being able to set yourself in someone's shoes, in other situations, to care someone else. And the second thing they emphasize a lot is this organization encourages students learn how to work with others and how to understanding with others. And in the conclusion, this organization makes everyone inside comment something in their life, and they also integrate everything on their different aspects during their life. For example, in class or in their daily life, they can use their Changemaker Hub spiritual to influence their life. And the last thing I want to say, the faculty always says practicing rather than being that. So they think practicing Changemaker Hub is really important aspect.
And for my part, I interviewed two professors, both in the engineering department. Asked them 4 questions, and I wanted to get rid of about 2 off the bat, mainly because they didn't really apply with them when I asked them how did you become involved in the Changemaker Hub, mainly because they were both not involved directly with the Changemaker Hub. And the next one was, what is the most prominent impact of the Changemaker Hub you see throughout the students involved? To their knowledge, that just basing it off what the Changemaker Hub does, they both said they can't really talk about what they have seen from the Changemaker Hub, mainly because again they're not a part of it, so they would rather not go into that part. However, when I asked them how does the Changemaker spirit get reflected in your ideas in daily life, I got 2 different perspectives, basically, where one of the professors sees it as little changes in helping the students, by teaching the students causes the change-making aspect of the university to be influencing through its students. And the other one was more of like through her research at the university, basically changing it that way. And the next question that I asked them that had more of an impact of like the discussion that took place was, how would you define it being a change maker? Now, for one of them, she saw it more as a social justice aspect of it, where she wanted to figure out what the situations causes discrimination between certain types of people. She wanted to make sure, like, because as engineers we don't really see what happens after we create something, like in industries or like if we build like power plants, we don't see the reactions of it with the society. And she wanted to go make engineers be like aware of what happens, the repercussions of what happens once we create something like that, like what is the social imbalance, or like if there's any consequences. Now, for the other professor that I had interviewed, he saw a change maker mostly as not as a big, like it's not to get the big picture of the change, but mostly just to focus on the little changes, like with students or doing little things at the community. He put a big emphasis on making the small changes around what you can do instead of the big picture, because once you do the big picture and you fail, there goes all that hard work. But once you do something small and you can basically, add the small things add up, then it feels more accomplished and you feel like you're making a difference, even if it is the smallest aspect of it. They both had very different views of the same topic, but it was very interesting to see how it still comes together as a part of a change-making type of viewpoint of the university.
So then I was responsible for interviewing students that were not involved with the program, much like our group. I was trying to gauge how much they knew about the program, as I had personally known little to nothing about the program before this project. The first person I interviewed was a male junior here at USD that is not involved in the program. I asked him a question of if he knew anything about the Changemaker program at all. He said that he had seen it being advertised around school and on the website, but did not really understand what it was all about. This was pretty similar to my experience. He did say that his freshman roommate was involved with the group, which is how he had first heard about the program, but knew a little more about it. I then gave him a little bit of background information that was previously mentioned in this podcast, so that he had a better idea of what we were talking about. I then followed up with a question about if he would be interested in joining the group now that he knows more about it. He said that it did sound interesting, but because his senior year was coming up very quickly, that he wasn't sure about how much he would contribute or get out of the program this late in his college career. My last question to him was one where I wanted to gauge his interest in common reasons why people join Changemakers, such as giving back to the community and sort of bettering themselves. He said that that was definitely one of the things that he was looking for, but he found that through his fraternity that puts on multiple philanthropic events and focuses on personal development, he found those things throughout college. The next person I interviewed was a female junior at USD that was also not involved with the Changemaker program. I got a lot of the same answers as the first person, which showed the trend that uninvolved students don't know much about the actual program activities, but rather has just seen it kind of being advertised around campus. She then went on to say that she was very involved with philanthropic associations in high school and how she looked for those types of opportunities in college, but once again found that joining Greek Life would suffice for that because of the events that they put on to give back to the community in a highly social atmosphere. This also brings me to the idea or trend that I saw, which is fraternities and sororities here at USD do share some of the same personal development and philanthropic ambitions as people in the Changemaker program.
So now that we have the background information on our subjects that we have interviewed, we're going to be seeing now how we would like to understand the impact of being a change maker on the students and faculty involved in the program, and seeing how its influences kind of go into the university. I just want to say, like, I mean, it was interesting. My professor, when she was interviewed to come here, she didn't like know much about the change making aspect of it, but once she found out about it, that's how she got into more of the aspect of being a change maker. I found that pretty interesting. How like once she found out, like she wanted to go more into it. So what do you guys think? Like, is it more of a like I would say, is it like kind of a sacred narrative, or like your thoughts or anything like that?
Yeah, so I definitely saw the program as being a sacred narrative from what came up in the interviews from people that are involved in the program. It seemed to have a very deep meaning to those kids, and it was clear that they cared very much about the program and what it has done for them. I see it as kind of serving as a platform for them to carry through with their ambitions. It may not have the explicitly religious aspects to it, but clearly has a deeper meaning to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, I think it's definitely a sacred narrative for them. Like because like one of my interview like is a involved student. She said like when she being a freshman in this school, like she said like this is cool opportunity to join, and she think like because like she personally is a really care about like social justice or something like that, so she really want to join this organization and being know more information about it.
I also interviewed involved students, and I actually found the same thing, that both the students I talked to were sort of, they wanted a community coming to USD and they didn't know where that would be. However, when they found the Changemaker program, it was sort of like they found their sort of niche of people who were all very selfless and driven to give to others, and there's a very strong community in the hub where they all sort of found this narrative of small change and giving back to others, and then they cultivated an entire space and an entire community out of just this idea of changing the individual's life. And personally, for me, there's a selflessness involved in the Changemaker narrative that I found intriguing. Especially, I sort of had notions going into this that change-making had to be some grand, social global project. But the students involved and the faculty both say it's just how you enact kindness in small ways in your everyday life.
Mm-hmm. Also going off of that, I mean, I would actually say like because once they found out about the change making, they actually implement, like two professors that I've seen, they try to implement it in their students in a way, kind of like saying like how the second professor that I interviewed was more of like, just because I'm teaching these students how to be engineers, they're going to go off and basically change the world in their own aspects, and that's one way of looking at it, just by teaching your students. And then the other one's more of like being more involved and knowing how the social justice aspect of it is kind of like, what's happening after the engineers build something. So like it's kind of like things like that. I found it was very different aspects, or like different views of viewing Changemaker, because like I saw one was like that made more sense, like, oh, because it's you're changing something small, eventually it gets something bigger. But the other one's more of the just social justice aspect is more of like I didn't really take that into account, because if I were to build something, I don't really think what happens like right after that, because like as an engineer you just build it and that's it. But even after you've done something, it's you are changing. So it is. I would say it's something that the change making is actually an aspect that even the professors themselves are going off of, not subconsciously, but or maybe subconsciously, because they're not like forcing it down their students. They're like, you have to do this or something like that.
I think it's interesting how even in typically unexpected venues for change making and social justice, because USD is a change maker campus, that narrative has sort of found its way into more untraditional places like a engineering classroom. So I thought that was sort of interesting, that it's like even it's affecting students who are uninvolved, sort of, on the side.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting to think about how if this organization didn't exist on our campus, and we weren't recognized as a Changemaker campus, if these kids would still be encouraged the same amount to do these types of changes, whether they be in the community or within themselves. So once again, it kind of seems like it just really encourages these kids to bring positive change on everything that they do in their lives, in their college careers.
So, so now that we understand like that kind of stuff, I want to go into like, do we agree that the Changemaker motto is more of like a sacred narrative? Like, do we want to argue that it is because of what's going on with how it's being influenced, how they're being, how it's being portrayed in the university?
I think it's more security narrative, like,
So yeah, sacred narrative?
yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's a sacred narrative just because, as we've discussed what sacred things are, it's things that hold deeper meaning to the individual partaking in whatever the narrative is. And I think that it can clearly be seen for the faculty and the students involved with this program that it holds deeper meaning for them. So I would say, yes, it is a sacred narrative.
Yeah, I would agree with what you just said, Kendall, and definitely agree that it is a sacred narrative for these kids.
I also would like to add that, I mean, it could also be a sacred narrative. It could be a lived religion as well, because, I mean, if it's a sacred narrative, I mean, you're living it as well.
Sacred narratives are sort of the basis for a lived religion a little bit.
So I see it as like a 2-for-1 kind of thing as well. Anything else, you guys? I mean, we covered a lot of ground here. All right, well, thank you for listening to this podcast, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.